So just tell us your name, when you came to Sahaja Yoga, and a bit about how you came to Sahaja Yoga.
Well, my name is Paul Keetley. My friends in Sahaja Yoga and my family call me Pavan, P-A-V-A-N. So it depends on who I'm answering to, but my name is Paul Pavan. I came to Sahaja Yoga in 1983, 22nd of April, and that was the culmination of quite a 10-year period of seeking, and I think I've just been born a seeker and was, very definitely on the lookout. How I got there, what brought me there? As a seeker, you look at a lot of things. Well, I suppose, firstly, how do you become a seeker? I had a lot of early success in life, in business. By the time I was 22 years of age, I had a Volvo and a Honda dealership in Western Australia. I had 30 people employed and country property and a wife that looked a bit like my mum. And I woke up one morning and I thought, I am not a happy person, and why is that? And the revelation that came fairly quickly was that the fulfillment that I've been attempting to find through this externalization was actually fulfillment of my father's agenda. He'd passed away a few years before. And so I realized that I'd been just trying to please him, and that I didn't have an intrinsic motivational orientation, except it was something that I knew. So it took me another 10 years of seeking, and that included all manner of things, including astrology, numerology. I ended up in a thing called the Self-Realization Fellowship, which was about getting self-realized. But of course they didn't hand out self-realization in the Self-Realization Fellowship. But I was a seeker. I'd been to India and I'd toured around, and my first trip to India was 1979, and very much felt that India was the spiritual essence of things, but still concerned, confused about how all of this fitted together. I had many books, many books, and I'd read a lot and so on. Anyway, come that period of time, I think as a prelude to getting realization, I was probably humbled for the first time, really humbled before getting it. So that was that was appropriate, because ultimately it's about recognition and surrender to the divine. And so come 22nd of April, how did I say? I saw Shri Mataji's photo in the paper, and she'd actually, it was an interview, and she had just left Perth, where I was. And the interview, I immediately felt this was somebody absolutely divine, and I wondered what to do next. I was staying at my mother's place because my relationships had fallen apart, and a lot of things had fallen apart, including my health. And I picked up a book, opened it up, and it said, God the Father is transcendent, he's beyond the creation. Sorry, I'm going to get a little moist about this because it was significant. But the book said, God the Father, excuse me, it's not going well.
No, it's perfectly all right.
God the Father is transcendent. He's beyond the creation. All the living work is being done by the Divine Mother, who cannot and will not resist the heartfelt call of the seeker of truth. And so for the first time, really in earnest, I started to pray to Mother, as Mother, and I'd seen Shri Mataji's photo, but I hadn't called up at that stage. And the wind blew in through the window, the curtains flapped, the hair stood up on the back of my neck, and suddenly I just knew everything was going to be absolutely okay, except that I needed tissue. I had this experience in my bedroom, and I just knew that everything was going to be all right. And that was, I'm not sure, a Thursday or Friday, something like that, but a couple of days later, the largest paper in Australia is the Sunday Times. It's made in the Western Australia. It comes out on Sunday, and it's like this, it's huge. And I just picked it and opened it, as I was wont to do. I was open to all kinds of spontaneous revelation, as it were. And my eye fell on a tiny little ad that said, Shri Mataji's appearing at this hall in Rockaby Road in Subiaco, and to be there that night. And I just couldn't believe it. I thought, that's not possible, you know, and it's such a tiny ad, how come? And as it turned out, it was a misprint. It actually said featuring a video of Shri Mataji, and that line was missing from the ad, so it had actually been left out. So I went off to Rockby Road in Subiaco to meet Shri Mataji, and I was with a friend, and we arrived, and they said, sit down. I should precurse this by saying one of the last bits of my seeking was to sit inside a wood frame pyramid, which was, I was sensitive to vibrations and many things, but sitting in this pyramid I used to clear out, and I had in there two books. One was the Gita by Juan Mascaro, and the other was the Gospels, which was just Christ. And I was always at some pains to try and resolve these two, what I came to appreciate are incarnations. And so I sat down and they said, well, actually, Shri Mataji, we're going to be watching a video. And I said, oh, okay, that's fine. And the video is from Houston, Texas. Now, I didn't appreciate it at the time, I only found out later, but she was actually inside a pyramid church in Houston, and she was talking, it was one of a series of talks that she was talking about the relationship between Krishna and Christ, and that in the ancient Puranas, I guess, very ancient texts in India, she was saying that it was quoted that Krishna had said, I will place you higher than me, and that he was the incarnation of the Vishuddhi, Christ was the incarnation of the Agnya, and that it was time that the Saraswara be open, that the chakra of the Saraswara be open. And so this was just like dealing me a whole deck of perfect cards and saying, there's all the answers to all the questions you've been asking. So that was very profound and very, just gobbled that up completely, and I thought, okay, well, we're on track here, this is somebody who knows what's what. I didn't appreciate at that stage, really, that Shri Mataji was the incarnation, but I was definitely aware that she was the right person. So then the question was, well, would you like self-realization? Spontaneous self-realization, and my understanding, my history was, this is not a 2-minute affair, you know, you don't have spontaneous self-realization, it's something you work out over a very long period of time. You've got karmas, dramas, consciousness levels, and all manner of things to work through. So, you know, to have this experience spontaneously, I was open to, but not expectant. So we had the experience, and I went deeply, profoundly thoughtless, just incredibly in another space. And I left there like a man in outer space, like like an astronaut. And my friend who I'd gone with said, "Oh, well, shall we go to town now?" And I said, "I'm not going anywhere. I'm going home." So I went home, and I was very, very deeply affected. And I had enough presence of mind to go to work, but I was still in this state, and but was working out that when nobody was there, I would just be profoundly overawed and full of grace, and my body was well again, which had been gone. So I had no doubt at all that this was what it professed to be, but I don't know. I can't communicate how profound it was, which is why I'm in this mess tonight. I have been a seeker, I'm sure, for lifetimes, and to find other and to have this experience was just so pivotal and so fulfilling. I think I was ready for something. I was ready to give it up. So it wasn't just a life-changing thing, it was a life-saving thing. And so for 10 days, everything went into suspension. All my health issues, my wealth issues, just everything, the world was suddenly transformed. Thank you. And I've had experiences before where I felt that there was, where I'd had perceptions, windows into spaces, but not doorways. And I realised that this was a doorway. So they couldn't keep me away. I just started to front up every morning for meditation, and it was just, I'd be getting them up for meditation. It's like that at the ashram, and I was just in it from day one and just knew it completely. I felt the vibrations from the word go, and I only had 2 questions the night of the realisation. I said, "How often do you meditate?" And somebody with enough presence of mind said, "If you're established in this state, then you can be in it pretty much all the time." And I said, "But how do you discriminate? How do you discern?" And I said, "You discriminate on vibrations, on vibrational awareness." And I said, "Oh, fantastic, I'm in," because I'd been overly thoughtful. I'd read a lot and, got to the end of my tether as far as trying to work out how to choose a way through life. So that was it. I basically was feeling the vibrations from the word go, and within a few months they said to come east, which I did, and I moved from Perth to Sydney in October, November. En route I went to Victoria, where I'd been born, and we'd had a big collective meeting in the mountains down there, and I stayed at the ashram, which Kew at that time was just a beautiful place. It was the first real ashram that I moved in. I went very close to moving in Perth, but I realised that I was a middle-aged guy, really, 32, and a lot of young people were there, and it was just, I don't know, you're in a different space. I couldn't accommodate the idea of being in a large ashram with a lot of younger people in the same room. Not that I didn't have any recognition of Sahaja, but anyway. So my first in ashram experience was in Kew in Victoria, and from there I came up to Sydney and basically moved in straight away. We had ashrams here and the first ashram in Chatswood, and ashram life basically for decades, really, for 2 decades.
Then your fate changed, and you then had much personal time with Shri Mataji, both in Hong Kong and other places, and she took a direct role in your life. So perhaps do you want to talk about how that transpired when you went from being a yogi in an ashram to somebody who was playing a role that Shri Mataji had personally directed for you?
I've always been very overawed to be in Mother's presence. Found it hard to speak, found it hard to do anything, but of course any indication that I should do something was, was total acceptance on my part. The first place we went to was to New York for the first time that the American collective had a puja together. They all gathered, the Canadians came. I beg pardon, I've been on India tour before that. But anyway, we got to America, and Shri Mataji, I hadn't gotten married in the first tour, though I'd been engaged, and that's another story. Many stories. We could be here all day. That's not the point. But the fact was that Shri Mataji was in New York, and she said, "Would you like to come to Europe? We're going on to Europe for the tour." And I said, "Oh, I'd love to, Shri Mataji." So Paul Henwood and myself flew with Shri Mataji from New York to London, and we stayed in Shri Mataji's house, and then we went on tour on the continent. And I was having all along, I'd written poetry and things as a kid, but my first year of 2, 3, 4, 5 in Sahaja, there was just a constant outpouring of poetry and things. So, and England had a resonance with me that I was sure I'd been there before. I just, and I'd had that experience of England and London before Sahaja, but to be there with Shri Mataji was mega. But she went away for a couple of days, and I was actually in the house pretty much alone there for a while. So that was great. And then we went on the tour around Europe, and we flew and we boated and we trained and we drove and we did whatever was on. But I've driven Shri Mataji a lot, but I was in that instance I was just part of the collective and just there. But I was having wonderful experiences.
What do you remember of that first European tour, particularly in the interactions with Shri Mataji you may have had?
Well, on the flight from New York to England, there's a really, really lovely hostess, a beautiful Indian lady. It was an Air India flight, and we were sitting, Mother wasn't in first class, we were all in economy. We were sitting next to her, Paul and myself, and I was trying to keep myself to be the thinnest I could be. And things. Anyway, this lady came along and she said, "Oh, there's something about you. I recognize, I know you," or something. And Shri Mataji smiled and she said, "Yes, I'm a teacher from India," and da da da. And these are two of my disciples. And my lid lifted right up. It was a kind of I guess it was understood previously, but to hear it from Mother and to introduce me as a disciple to somebody was, I think by then I was over the initial shock, and I really recognised that Shri Mataji was an incarnation, and so to be called a disciple by Shri Mataji was, a big deal.
Was that the occasion when you shared your birthday together?
It was actually. That was on that flight.
You want to tell us that?
Yes. Well, the two Australians, as it was, who were travelling with Mother and sitting with Mother, were both Paul Henwood and Paul. And she started to talk about Paul in the Bible and said basically this fellow was I don't know how to put it politely, but he was a rot. He wasn't the real deal. He wasn't correct. He wasn't right. He rolled with women. She just started to tick off all the things that were wrong about this poor fellow and therefore the Christian religion. And being brought up as a Christian, as a Catholic, and having all this trotted out, and it wasn't common, nobody I knew had a different name, but I said perhaps it might be a good idea to change our name, Shri Mataji, because she was definitely giving Paul a thumbs down. And she said, "Yes, that's a good idea." She said, "We'll call you Pavan." And I was not courageous around Shri Mataji to question or ask anything, so I just sat on it for a while. It wasn't until later that I heard that Pavan meant the wind, which was, we were flying at that time. And I'd also had this experience at the time, just prior to realisation of this wind coming into the room, and when I got it. So yeah, it felt very, very, very nice to me, but I didn't push it. And it wasn't until later that somebody, coordinator from Australia, was talking to Shri Mataji and mentioned me about something about Paul, and she said, "Oh no, you call him Pavan." and so it's kind of stuck. Yeah.
The birthday.
The birthday?
Your birthday, Shri's birthday, that's it.
Yeah, Shri Mataji's birthday. Funnily enough, because I've been a seeker, I've looked at a lot of things from India and a lot of the gurus and so on, and somehow stories would come to me about these different people on the way, and they were not good stories. And so I had no doubt that they were in some way not kosher or deceitful. And one of the things that I'd been into was astrology and numerology and so on. And so I thought, well, they should at least have an auspicious birthday. And it turned out that Shri Mataji's born on the equinox, which is when I was born. And, at some stage this came up in conversation. We were in Sydney at a restaurant, and one of the other yogis mentioned he'd been born in 1951, and I sparked up and I said, "Oh, Shri Mataji, I'm born in 1951 too." And she said, "What's your birthday?" I said, "Oh, it's the same as yours, Shri Mataji." And she looked down a bit, and she looked up and she said, "I don't envy you a bit, a life of trials." And I knew what she was talking about, but I couldn't talk it down at all because I was, in the most heavenly place possible. But yes, it was a point that helped me recognise Shri Mataji in the first up. That she had this most auspicious setting for her birth and everything. When something's right, it just resonates with the whole of your being, and you don't necessarily need the data and the information, but as it comes in, you see that everything fits and everything is absolutely right and everything is correct, and you don't hear any dissonance or resonance with the truth. It just is. So whenever Shri Mataji spoke to me, I was always attentive, but she didn't address me too much in terms of personal things. I think one thing she said, which would probably be of interest to the yogis, she said to me once, she said, "Sri Ganesha will take you to the heart, but Sri Hanuman will take you the rest of the way." And I think I took at that time the suggestion that I should be more proactive and get more cranked up with things. And so that was advice I tried to take to heart and get involved and be more productive. But Shri Mataji, I think the Australians always had a very special place with Shri Mataji. I know going early on the tours we'd been the first in, and it seemed that Australians had a less complicated and overlaid view of things. They were able to, I guess, consistent with the chakra, be able to just see whom other was.
Shri Mataji, especially in those years, you went to all different places on her instruction, Hong Kong, Canada, Japan. Think back in those days and what motivated you to be so detached and surrendered to her, her will?
Well, I mentioned before in this emotional way that I was humbled just before coming to Sahaja Yoga. I'd had a lot of success, and I was considered something of a shining light in the industry I was in and so on. But everything had fallen apart. Life, business, relationships, all sorts of things. So I realised that actually that's not a bad state to be empty and to be humble. And so each time that Shri Mataji asked me to do something, I just had faith that it would be okay. And typically that just meant dropping off not a lot of possessions, a few things, and going somewhere. And typically on the rebound from that, coming back from each of those adventures, I'd had this marvellous green patch of business and success and so on, and everything would suddenly come good in a flurry. And that I realised early that I always had what I needed, absolutely had what I needed. I never had cause to doubt or concern or petition Mother. I did have one interesting thing happened in Hong Kong. I was living in Hong Kong, and I've been to a program at this place called the Charter House, which was a new building, new hotel. And getting out of the hotel, somehow my wallet had come out of my pocket, and a fair amount of money had come out of it, about $500 or something, and I was due to fly back to Australia, and I kind of, when I discovered my wallet was gone back up there, and I found it in the street, the money was missing, and I thought, oh well, that's not terribly fair. Here I am doing your work, Mother, and I've done in 500, and gosh, oh well, whatever it is, must be. I didn't know how to explain it or whatever, but anyway, I had to fly back to Australia just after that, and I went to the airport, and Cathay said, look, we've overbooked the flight. If you want to come back tomorrow, we'll give you sort of an upgrade, and we'll give you $500 for making that decision, if you don't mind, tonight. And I said, great, no worries. And they said, but if you hang around, we might be able to upgrade you and get you home tonight, but we won't know until the last minute. Is that okay with you? I said, it's not a problem. So I got given the 500 and a first class ticket back to Sydney with Cathay that night. So I thought, well, my petition was heard. So, in that sense, I've never doubted that there will always be enough. Having said that, the country and other people have been through plenty of undulations and so on, but when you've had a taste of success and you found it hollow, then it's no longer about materiality. It's not about gratification at that level. And in fact, it's. I think if your focus is there, the divine supports you. That's as simple as it gets. It might put you to some taxing sometimes, but yeah.
So, in relation to a lot of your early service to Shri Mataji, did you see in some way that it was a calling, or did you feel compelled, or was you just totally surrendered to what Shri Mataji asked you to do? Because you did a lot of work in different countries in those days.
Well, I think the most that we can be is a good instrument. I think that's the best we can be. We can be a tool for the divine and ultimately realise our own divinity. So I think surrender is just the end of the story. First and last, surrender is the story. And if you get clear direction from Shri Mataji or request to do something, to me that was, as Peter said before, it's a no-brainer. There was no question of going or not going. It was a great joy to go, and I've had that experience where at different times in different roles, I mean, when Mother first formed the trusteeship here, she made me a trustee, and so on and so on. You were on that magic carpet, you've got the divine attention on you, and everything is just, you say, pick up your chair and walk, and they do, everything works out. So you have that divine support. And so there was no question of not going, and I've always felt beyond receiving it myself, that there's only one thing to be achieved, and that is to share the experience and to help work it out in the world. I had one experience when I hadn't been in Sahaja, a dream, and it was very, very profound. And I dreamt I was like Rip Van Winkle. I woke up and I'd been asleep. I was under this tree, this vast tree, and I was covered in twigs and branches and everything, and it was a revelation that I'd been asleep for a very long time, and this tree had grown and it had manifested and it had spread out and done everything. And I had this overwhelming sense of loss, that I hadn't seen it, I hadn't been part of it, I hadn't participated, and it was a sense of grief that was so strong it stayed with me for days. It was like an unreal experience. So anytime anything came up that gave me a nudge to say, this is not right, of course, in spite of my humble demeanour, I can get quite feisty with people. Anytime I had that notion that I'm either going to smack somebody in the mouth or run away, I was held in check by this experience that I'd had, which is whatever you do not cut yourself off from the reality of this, in spite of the appearances, in spite of the collective, in spite of the leadership, in spite of dramas that are unfolding, or anything that you can think of. You, to the core, know what this is, and do not cut yourself off.
During some of those exercises you went through, and obviously you met challenges, there were difficult times, so the fact that you'd gone to do something for Shri Mataji, yet you hit difficult times, was that a challenge to your faith in any way, or how did you console those two issues?
I think that if you're a yogi, it's a journey, of course, as everybody will say, but at different times you'll go through something. You'll fail personally, others will fail, you'll have doubts, whatever it is. And there begins a rebuilding of your spiritual edifice, or it does for me. What happens for me is I sort of dismantle everything and then I put it back together again. No, this is you do know, you have had, that is right, that is correct, that's it. You can check that on vibrations, yes, okay. So when there's been doubts or there's been big issues and big problems, you have to stay the course. There's no other game in town, as I've often said to people. Once you start working on yourself, on your spiritual ascent, because that's really the only game in town. What are you going to do? You're going to tangent and go off and go away. I think maybe in other lifetimes I've done that, and I've had that experience where don't do it again. Don't go there. And yeah.
What can you say about your own personal revelation in those times that you've been with Shri Mataji in relation to the nature or the qualities of God?
Well, in terms of, I was gratified early to hear that Shri Mataji said and reiterated my own understanding that there is a God the Father, Parabrahma, transcendent, Sadashiva, and there is God immanent as Mother. And therefore, God the Father is to be aspired to. God the Mother will take you on that journey. She'll cleanse you, she'll nourish you, she'll purify you, she'll perfect you, she'll correct you, and she'll ultimately take you into the presence and then the unity of the Divine Father. And that's really where we're headed. I'm sorry, what was the question?
A lot of people will be asking, what was it like? What did it feel like? How did you cope with the experience? Was it beyond imagining? Was it the awe of God? But as an individual from the human heart, how did it feel?
Well, when I first got my realisation in Perth, and Shri Mataji wasn't there, it was just a video, I had no doubt at all this was Shri Mataji, this was the lady, this was, it just came to me completely. So in that experience, I didn't think that I was going to see much difference in being with Shri Mataji in person. And the first time I saw Shri Mataji was in India, in person, and she was taking lunch, and there was a group of yogis that was basically in this large area, yard, more like a grove. And Shri Mataji was nonchalantly, taking her food. And as soon as I caught sight of her physically, my chakras went mad. I was pinging, clinging, and I suddenly got the realisation that there is a lot of difference. You can know Mother on the subtle, and we do know Mother on the subtle, but also being her presence was going to be different. And I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting it to be the same, because I felt that we knew her based on the subtle. So I would say to people who are, saying, "Oh, I never saw her, I never met her." She's as accessible now as she was then, and the fact that there is all this, there's all this recordings, all these videos, there's a photo, but more importantly, Shri Mataji would say something like, "I don't even know if I exist," and yet she was there in front of us. So the real essence of who Shri Mataji is not about anything external. It's about Shri Mataji's internal, and she's within you. She's your Divine Mother. She knows you intimately. She's been with you forever, and therefore she's going to take you, where you want to go. So if you're a seeker, if you're seeking the Divine, and I think everybody is a seeker, and I think that divinity is intrinsic, and hopefully it will be all made available to everybody over time. I hope there's not going to be a line drawn in the universe somewhere, and people are lost. But I just felt her immediately via video and via the picture and via my own vibrational awareness immediately. And if you're not feeling that, you should just jump into it and work on yourself until you do. I really can't say for anybody else. I just know that for me it was a super profound experience, and I've also seen people come to programs and have very profound experiences first up, walk out the door and not seen them again. So I'm a bit of a loss to explain something that for me was so obviously huge, and for other people is either, whatever it is, something else.
In the early days,
yes,
it's fair to say that it was not an easy time, particularly in Australia, with some very strong leadership and some personal challenges. Many people dropped off at that time and found that difficult. How did you reconcile what happened in those days and come through that?
I realised that whilst we talk to people about spontaneous self-realisation, it's a very progressive and ongoing thing, virtually an evolutionary thing, and that whilst we can facilitate evolution and can, it's not an instantaneous thing. Everything works out over time. Me and everybody else in Sahaj. So some of the people involved who were difficult. And I think the collective supported me. There were people who I had immense regard for, who were there from the word go, and who, Bogdan was a good example. At one stage I was ready to split. That was it, And somehow he just swaned up alongside me, an arm around my shoulders, and wandered off to buy a make-believe Coca-Cola, and things like that. The collective, I think, that's the other answer to that question, is where will you find Mother now? You'll find her in the collective. The fact is that when we do sit down and we do put our attention on vibrations, or we watch a video of her, the person who picks the tape, what is heard that night, that's from beyond relative time. So you will find Mother in the moment and in the collective. And I don't mean that you should slavishly hang out and be a Sahaj groupie. That's not an appropriate term, but if you shouldn't be a fundamentalist or a die-hard. You expected to keep you and develop your discretion, but when the collective's together and Mother's talks are on and that type of thing, then Mother is definitely manifesting, and the decisions, even by those people who think they know whatever they think, in spite of ourselves, we get looked after, and in spite of ourselves, the right thing works out. And even things that appear adverse are very character building. You have to expand your sense of self to encompass larger and larger spheres of concern and interest. Because if you diminish, and I think Peter said it before, if you don't meditate, you start to diminish. Instead of flowering and unfolding and evolving and being instrumental, you start to disappear. So Mother is very much here. It sounds grandiose, but she is here. And incarnations work as Christ is here, because they've worked it out in their lifetime. They've come on earth, they've had enough impact and influence on humanity to work out their chakra or their situation. So
you've had a long Sahaj experience. When you think back on your long time in Sahaj, are there any exceptional moments or experiences that really are important to you when you think back on that time?
Well, it's funny, you were talking before about that Pondypur Mahashivatri, and in that Puja talk in 1984, she gets to the end, she said, I hope I've been able to explain to you why I'm here today. And that, when you hear that line, it's not something that Mother trots out. I don't think I've heard it in any other talk. But in that talk, she has actually defined what spirit is, what her job is in bringing spirit to the brain, enlightening the brain, and what that's going to mean for us collectively. I think that's that talk and that video. And we walked through those streets that night. I'm at the risk of sounding grandiose, even on the way to that puja, I felt like we were bestowing vibrations and grace on the population just by walking around. And that was an amazing feeling, and we don't feel like that every day. But that's I think the potential for Sahaja Yogis is to manifest like that, and I've often said that, you know, now Mother's gone, and even before she went, if people don't see Mother in us, then we're just the same as everybody else. We're just some other talking head.
I'm going to cast back to a significant moment, I think, for all of us, which was the end of that 1983 tour, when Shri Mataji called the Australians to her bungalow at the edge of the beach there. We walked along together. We sat before her, then she asked each of us in the audience to talk to her and reflect upon the tour. Do you remember that time and that occasion?
I can't say I do. I can't, and in fact, it's disturbing to me that I remember so little of so many things. I'm glad you didn't ask me to pin me down on years and things like that, because they're fast.
You were there. Peter was there. I was there.
Yeah. No, I can't. But things used to happen on the tour. I remember, and I think it might have been one of those early tours. It may have been that same tour. We went into town ostensibly to buy incense, and while we were there, my eye was taken by this camphor in big packs of camphor, and I said, "Well, that's interesting. What's that stuff?" That's camphor. I had no idea what it was for or anything, but I bought some along with the incense. We went back to the program place and where we were staying. And Shri Mataji sat us down and talked about it and said, I want you to work with your left side on camphor. You need to get some camphor and some burners, and and this will be very clear for your left side. And I'm going, I've got this camphor, which I didn't know. And I did find at different times when Shri Mataji would talk at a program or something that very subject was in the collective attention and in my attention beforehand. So, yeah.
Looking back at your 35 years, what do you think it has been that sustained you through that journey, when many others have sort of fallen by the wayside?
Yeah. I don't know that they've fallen by the wayside. I think this is just a kind of a perception or a way of explaining what happened. They're not present at the moment. In the more recent years, we've been content, it seems, to help people get their Kundalini awakened, in the hope that somehow that's a pathway or a riverbed that's flowed down once and it can flow again, and that's our primary responsibility. And I think all the people who've ever put their shoulder to the Sahaja wheel or anything else, I was hearing the other night about Brian Bell, who's been epic in the establishment of New Zealand, and how the lady that he got his realisation from, who was, is not participating formally in Sahaja now, but, each of these links in the chain and these drops in the ocean and so on, they've all intermingled and all interrelated, and I don't perceive that people who are no longer here in the formal sense are fallen by the way. But having said that, I don't think there's any other game in town. As I said, I once asked Shri Mataji, I said, Shri Mataji, because I wasn't feeling particularly grand at the time, I said, is it possible, can we work it out in one lifetime? And she said, well, yes you can, look how far you've come. And I couldn't really go to bat on my failings at that point, so I had to let it lay. But it did encourage me to say, okay, whatever, just continue, just work it out as best you can. And in the Gita it says, you work at it and maybe you don't make it, but you come back again and so on. So
from 2005 to 2006, and being present here at Burwood on many occasions with Shri Mataji in that very different form where, there was a change in the physical. From your perception, was there a difference in her divinity or manifestation between those faces?
My mum, my own mother, who actually got a hug from Shri Mataji, which was pretty wonderful. She's in palliative care at the moment. She's got cancer, and at some stages she's been very ill. She's been very ill. She's been out of her mind, literally, and it's been a wonder to me that other people who know her or are related to her have been so affected by her medical condition. Because to me there is no difference in who she is and who she'll be when she's passed. She's my mum, and she's had an epic life and wonderful blessing. She's not in pain. She's serene. It's like she's got one foot in heaven already. And a lot of things seem to be working out in our family at the end of her life before she goes. So I never had a sense of any diminishment at all with Shri Mataji. People have said about an escalation of her. I think the most profound thing towards the end was the 2008 Guru Puja, where she asked for some Australians to go. We were there the night before, pranam to Shri Mataji, and I'd been staying in the hotel for a few days, and I had a little room to myself, which was fortunate because I was getting a massive working over. I really understood there was something big coming up for the puja. And I'd also had a very profound dream, that all of which was pointing to this is going to be something significant. And so when Shri Mataji spoke fully in 2008 at the time and said, okay, this is it. Your job, go give en masse realisation. You have got your hands in the air, both hands in the air. That's your job, and you take that on individually, you personally. And so that was the most profound recent moment I've had in her presence, and that was with thousands of other yogis who were there. But at different times I've been very much aware that Shri Mataji is working things out. I understand now from incarnations that they come to establish something that is needed or next. And I could see that she was working out at different times. I remember in New Jersey, at the time she first started to talk about coming back to Australia, or there was talk, and she was sitting there post Krishna Puja, I think it was, and she was moving with a kind of a movement like this, and the vibrations in the whole place were just going like a cyclonic or tectonic shift, and I realised that for an incarnation to try and work out something for all of humanity is just an immense task. When you realise how much conditioning, psychology, subconscious, cultural, to so many dramas that involves, that for Mother to last as long as she lasted, to me was a surprise, because I couldn't see how she could work. She would say, oh, I'm doing nothing, I'm just sitting here, but on the subtle, she was moving more than mountains. So I wasn't surprised that she got ill, and I wasn't surprised that I kind of, in my reading of the tea leaves, I thought she might pass a little later than she did, maybe a year or so, but here or there. But I definitely had the feeling well prior to 2008 that the job was done. Whatever it was that she needed to do was accomplished, and that there didn't need to be any, there was no correlation with the physical state. It just didn't occur to me that she was in any way diminished or not well.
And to those people who will never get an opportunity to be in Shri Mataji's presence and become yogis, is there any advice that you can give them about if they've missed out on something, or the fact that they feel they've missed an opportunity?
My immediate reaction when I first got realisation was, well, I don't need to meet Shri Mataji. And I really didn't. I got fully vibrational awareness, I had the experience, I knew what was entailed, I knew it was the start of a long purification process and personal one and so on. All the tools were made available, all the knowledge was made available. I didn't think I needed to see Shri Mataji. When I did, it was a surprise and it was great. But as she said in one of her talks, if I appear beside you, sitting on the end of your bed or walking down the street with you or putting my hand on your head, don't be surprised, because any of that can happen, So I think if the real moment with Mother is so still and so silent and so singular that I think anybody can have that experience any time. And you would happily just sit there completely silent, just being with Mother. That was the thing. It was like being at the centre of the cyclone. But she was always very attentive and knew. I mean, when I first travelled with her in Europe, I had 3 burning questions that I was dying to ask her that were deeply personal and really relevant. And I couldn't bring myself to ask her. I could never front up and be light or personal with Shri Mataji. I was always overly deferential, I suppose. I don't know. I was just overawed. But she sent message that, oh, and tell Pavan 1, 2 and 3. These 3 things that were deeply personal and which I hadn't mentioned to anybody else or to her, and gave me the answers. So she knew us very, very, very well, and I think she knows, as she's supposed to, she does know for lifetimes and for your evolution.
Well, last question is, those who, in the future of Sahaja, who are on this path and have their doubts and struggles and their challenges, is there any advice you could give them based on your experience? And
there's a nice quote from Shakespeare that says, "A thing is neither so good or bad as thinking makes it so." And the real struggle is to get a line on something and believe it, you know, because that's an intellectual position or idea that may seem valid for a period of time, but rarely stands up for anything over time. The only thing that stand up over time are the pure principles of the chakras and so on, the qualities. They're not sort of points of view or judgmental positions that you take on things. So don't paint yourself into a corner. Don't take a position on anything. I had that feeling when I first came in. There were things that I didn't understand or didn't necessarily believe, but I wasn't going to let them knock me out. I was going to say, okay, well, I'll just put that to one side for a moment and see, because there's all this other stuff that's happening. And I think that's the, you know, if you're true to your own internal compass and don't believe your mind, which can come up with anything, you know. That was my question on day one, was, well, how do you discriminate? Oh, you discriminate on vibration. Oh, thank goodness, because you can talk yourself into anything. You can rationalise any position, any idea, and it can be completely wrong. You know, the earth is flat one lifetime and the next it's round, you know.
As we come to the end, is there anything you'd like to say that you haven't had a chance to express as yet?
Yeah, so please excuse my collywobbles early in the piece for being so emotive. Self-realisation is the most profound thing that you can experience. And God exists, but until you know yourself, you can't know God. Self-realisation, whether it's a very subtle thing or something that you don't feel for a start or whatever, you are a drop of divine spark or water or ocean, whatever it is. You really are. And but that is just a pure consciousness, so don't buy the overlays of the physical or the mental or the emotional. That's why I'm apologising for being emotional, because, you know, even those things, whilst they're to do with your values and your experience, they're not who you ultimately are. So I'm sorry for sharing too much of that stuff, which is really transitory.
Thank you.
Thank you.